from New York, it's That Kevin Show.
See, I knew it.
Come on, Kev. What's a few classified documents between friends?
I told you all the time. I knew it. I knew he had some too.
Here he is, That Kevin McCullough.
And welcome back. My next guest is no stranger to That Kevin Show. In fact, she was one of our very first guests nearly a year ago now, as we've gone into our second season. And I am very excited to welcome her back, especially on such an auspicious week. Earlier this week, the former president wrapped up a second big win in his attempt to retake the presidency. We're talking about the New Hampshire primary, of course, and what lies ahead with Dr. Monica Crowley. Hello, lady.
Hey, Kevin, great to be back with you.
You got it. This week, we took another step towards what is sure to be a somewhat tumultuous year news-wise. And I continue to be a little bit amazed at how effortlessly, and I know it's not, but effortlessly it looks like Donald Trump is going from courtrooms to the campaign trail, to acceptance speeches, to huge, oversized turnout crowds that are showing up for him. What were your takeaways from New Hampshire this week?
You know, it really is amazing. Donald Trump is like a superhero. And I mean that in all sincerity. I don't know where he gets the energy, Kevin, to do this. I mean, he really does have some sort of superhuman reservoir of energy here to keep going, because he'll go from a rally in Iowa to a New York courthouse to a rally in New Hampshire, and then back again, and then back to Palm Beach, Florida, to Mar-a-Lago. And I honestly don't know how he does it, but he's doing it. And it's quite incredible, because what we have seen this week and then previously in Iowa is an historic comeback. Now, as you know, and we've talked about it, my very first job was for another man very famous for his comeback, Richard Nixon. And I worked with him during the last years of his life, where he had a third comeback after Watergate in his post-presidential years. Donald Trump is giving Richard Nixon a run for his money in terms of being the master of American comebacks. And when he wins in November, Kevin, he's going to trump Nixon in terms of comebacks, that's for sure. But what we saw what we saw in New Hampshire just adds to the historical nature of what Donald Trump is doing, because Trump now is the only non-incumbent Republican candidate to have won both Iowa and New Hampshire. And he did it with over 50% of the vote in both places. He did it without doing a single debate. And he did it without the backing of the Republican governors in those states. It is absolutely mind-blowing what he's doing. But remember, Donald Trump is not just a garden variety candidate, Kevin. He is leading a movement. And that, among many things, is what sets him apart.
Well, let me get to that, because there's a couple of things that you unpacked there that I had intended to ask you about anyway. So let's start with Nixon. He, had to campaign after losing the presidency. He had to get back out on the trail and make his case to the American people. He had not been president previously, so it's not an exact correlation to the Trump scenario. But are there similarities that you have identified in Trump losing in 2020? I don't think that he lost. I think that that COVID rigged the game in a lot of different ways. But do you see similarities in what has happened to the man in the interim of not being the candidate the last go around and what he's doing now?
Yeah, remember, Richard Nixon was vice president for 8 years under Eisenhower. And then in 1960, he ran for president on his own against JFK. And Nixon did not lose that election either. The way Trump did not lose the 2020 election. Democrats are very good at election fraud, as we know, and they've been doing it for decades. So Nixon then spent the next 6 years in what he called his wilderness years. And what he did is pretty close to what Donald Trump has done over the last 4 years, which is stay relevant to the political scene, stay engaged with the voters, and travel around the country giving out endorsements, doing fundraisers, doing speeches for other Republican candidates around the country, so that when he was ready to run again in 1968, like Donald Trump in 2024, he had all of these favors to call in. This is how politics works. So Nixon was very smart about that. Donald Trump has been very smart about it as well, which is why he's able to pull off these incredible wins without necessarily the infrastructure of a traditional candidate,
Right.
meaning not just the campaign infrastructure that a traditional candidate like a Ron DeSantis had, but also without sort of the traditional backing of all of the Republican, traditional establishment Republicans, which is what DeSantis had. We're in a completely different universe. So Nixon was operating in a more establishment kind of traditional structure, even though he, like Trump, was an outsider, Kevin. But Trump has remade the party, and he's remade how to do this. But only Donald Trump can pull that off because he's got one thing that no other candidate has, and he developed it organically. He's got an emotional bond with the voters, not political, not intellectual, emotional, and that is unbreakable. And that is really the thing at base that's powering his candidacy through.
We're speaking with Dr. Monica Crowley. You should hear her podcast, the Monica Crowley podcast. You can get it anywhere podcasts are offered. And multiple time best-selling author. Honored to have her with us. Monica, I was thinking, and I didn't hear anybody else mention it on election night. I did coverage for Salem News Channel and a couple of other outlets, but I cannot help but draw the irony that Nikki Haley, in the 24 hours after New Hampshire, continued to spam her social media feed with all of this. I've always bucked the establishment, and the establishment doesn't like me, and I'm going to kick the establishment in South Carolina. And it's like she's trying to pitch herself as the establishment, the anti-establishment candidate. Donald Trump in Iowa had to defeat the endorsement of their sitting Republican governor. To defeat Nikki Haley in New Hampshire, he had to defeat the endorsement of the sitting Republican governor. I don't see where Donald Trump has establishment backing. What I see is he has the backing of the voters. Republican voters like this guy, and the establishment, if you want to call the elected class the establishment in South Carolina, tend to be very MAGA in their approach to their politics currently, where he has the endorsement of the entire delegation. So she's down 30 points. If she loses worse in South Carolina than she did in Iowa, is this the end of her career?
Yeah, because if you lose your home state, Kevin, it is, that's your political obituary. I mean, you cannot lose your home state and then say, well, I'm going to run again in 4 years. It really doesn't work that way. If you can't beat the leading contender in your own party, in your own state, voters say, well, then how are you going to beat the CCP out of Beijing? How are you going to beat the Iranian mullahs out of Tehran? How are you going to beat Putin out of Moscow? The logic does not follow.
Which is why a lot of people have observed that Ron DeSantis was very smart and very just genius in getting out when he did. As we're coming right back with Dr. Monica Crowley.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.